I was standing outside my sister's house, holding a bottle of wine I had carefully picked out, Cabernet Sauvignon, her favorite. It was Christmas Eve. Through the window, I could see my entire family gathered around the fireplace, laughing, toasting, opening gifts. My nephew ran by with a Santa hat. My father gave my brother-in-law a hearty pat on the back. My mother, she looked radiant. No one had noticed I was out there. They hadn't even invited me. That was the night I stopped trying. My name is Olivia Bennett, and for 10 years, I was the forgotten one, the quiet sister, the disappointment. I was excluded from family dinners, group trips, even the group chat. At first, they masked it in subtle ways. "Oh, we thought you were busy," or "It was last minute, you understand." But I understood too well. I wasn't welcome. I was a reminder of something they didn't want to see. Or maybe I was just too different, too quiet, too ambitious. Who knows? They stopped calling. I stopped reaching out. 10 years went by like that. Birthdays came and went without so much as a text. I grieved them like they had died. And in a way, they had. At least, the version of them I once believed in. But then, everything changed. One morning, I received a phone call. I was having my usual black coffee in my small but elegant home office. The voice on the line was calm, professional. "Ms. Bennett, this is Robert Langston from Wellington and Chase. We've finalized the valuation of your late uncle's estate. I just wanted to confirm, you are aware the total property value now exceeds $4.2 million? I barely responded. My uncle, my father's estranged brother, had left everything to me. No one in the family knew. They didn't even attend his funeral. But news like that doesn't stay quiet for long. 3 days later, my phone started ringing like it hadn't in years. My mother, my sister, my cousins. People who hadn't spoken to me in a decade suddenly remembered my name. It was almost funny. Almost. If your own family ignored you for a decade and then came back after you came into money, would you take them back? Or would you finally show them who you've become? Comment below. And don't forget to subscribe. There's a lot more I need to tell you. For the longest time, I thought the distance between me and my family was my fault. I was the middle child. Not the golden oldest, not the charming youngest, just the one in between. The one who read quietly in corners, who preferred solitude to small talk, who built her world slowly, without asking for help. I wasn't difficult, but I wasn't easy either. I suppose I didn't fit their mold. Still, I tried. I went to every birthday party, brought thoughtful gifts, volunteered to help cook at Thanksgiving, even when no one asked me to. I remembered everyone's favorite dessert. I mailed handwritten cards for Mother's Day and anniversaries. I smiled when I felt invisible, laughed at jokes I didn't find funny, nodded along when they talked over me. At first, I told myself it was in my head. Maybe they were just busy. Maybe they didn't mean to forget to tell me about that family dinner, or the trip to the cabin, or Aunt Marian's surgery. Maybe the group chat really was acting up again. But there's only so many times you can be forgotten before you realize it's intentional. The shift wasn't sudden, it was a slow erosion, like watching paint chip off a wall you spent years building, one flake at a time. It started when I turned down a job offer from my father's friend. It was a high-paying corporate position in a firm I had no passion for. I'd just launched my own design consultancy and had 2 clients lined up. I was excited, hopeful, nervous. But when I shared the news at dinner, the room went quiet. My mother was the first to speak. "Well, I suppose some people just don't like stability." Then came my sister Lauren. "Olivia, no offense, but maybe you should take the job. You're not exactly known for finishing things." I remember the burn in my throat as I swallowed my pride. I smiled, said, "Thanks for the advice," and excused myself early that night. They never asked how my business was going. In the months that followed, the invitations slowed. My name barely came up in family group chats. When I tried to start conversations, they died after a few dry responses. And slowly, I stopped trying. The final confirmation came on my 35th birthday. I had planned a small dinner at a restaurant I loved. I booked a private room, pre-ordered a cake, even printed place cards. Out of 11 people I invited from my family, 2 showed up. My cousin Daniel and his wife, bless them. They were warm, embarrassed, and kept checking their phones. I found out later there had been a surprise engagement party for my sister that same night. No one told me. That was the night I stopped pretending. The night I realized I could be standing 10 feet away from them and still be completely unseen. So I turned inward. I focused on my business. I worked 14-hour days, sometimes more. I stopped sending cards. I stopped texting first. I became, in their eyes, the distant one, the one who pulled away. Funny how that works, isn't it? What they never noticed, what they never even bothered to ask, was that I had built something. I had spent years planting seeds in silence, investing carefully, growing a client list that eventually spanned states, then countries. I wasn't just doing well, I was thriving. But to them, I was still the girl who chose to be different, the one who let success isolate her. Or so they said. What they didn't know was that I hadn't isolated myself. I had simply stopped waiting for a place at their table. And still, not once during those 10 years did anyone pick up the phone and say, "Olivia, how are you really?" Not until they heard the number. Not until they realized what I now owned. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always come with a dramatic reveal. Sometimes, it's a small detail that catches your attention. A misplaced comment. A strange pause. A forgotten truth. For me, it started with a family photo. It was about 3 years into the silence, a time when I had mostly made peace with being excluded. I was scrolling through Facebook late at night, something I usually avoided, and saw a photo tagged by a distant cousin. They were all at a vineyard upstate. My parents, my sisters, a few aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years. Everyone smiling with glasses of wine in hand. The caption reading, "Family means everything." I stared at it longer than I should have. What struck me wasn't the event itself. It was the fact that they were at my client's vineyard, a project I had worked on for nearly a year, overseeing their full rebranding. I had even gotten them featured in a major travel magazine. It was the kind of work I was proud of, the kind I used to hope my family would one day notice. And yet, no one mentioned it. No one connected the dots. Or worse, they had, and chose to say nothing. A week later, I got the real answer. I was meeting with that same client, James, the vineyard owner, to review their new packaging design. We were having coffee on the terrace when he casually said, "It was nice seeing your family here last weekend. They were very polite." My heart skipped. "You knew they were my family?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. James looked confused. "Of course. Your sister Lauren introduced herself, said you two used to be close. She even joked about how you're the famous one now." The famous one? That line hit me like a slap. I smiled, nodded, finished the meeting, but when I got in my car, I sat in silence for a long time, hands clenched on the wheel, engine off. That's when the full picture began to form. They weren't just forgetting me, they were actively erasing me. They knew about the vineyard. They knew I was working with major clients. They had watched from a distance, maybe even talked about me, but kept me out of everything. Not just birthdays or dinners, business, opportunities, connections that could have meant more growth. And Lauren, my sister who once cried on my shoulder after her first heartbreak, who used to braid my hair when we were little, she had sat there, smiling, pretending I was a stranger to my own accomplishments. But that wasn't even the worst part. A month later, I learned from a mutual friend that my mother had been telling people I'd burned bridges with the family, that I'd chosen to isolate myself, that I was too proud to come around anymore. I wanted to scream, to write a letter, to call each of them and demand the truth, but I didn't. Instead, I made tea, I lit a candle, and I sat down with a notebook and wrote 3 words at the top of the page. They erased me, and then, underneath, let them watch me rise. Because that was the moment I stopped grieving. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about being forgotten. It was about being deliberately diminished, undervalued, framed as difficult so they wouldn't have to face the guilt of what they'd done. They made me the outsider, but they had no idea who I had become while they were busy pretending I didn't exist. Grief doesn't always come when someone dies. Sometimes it shows up in silence. In the quiet realization that the people you would have done anything for, would have bled for, never truly saw you. Or worse, saw you, and turned away anyway. That realization broke me more than I expected. After the call with the vineyard client, after the confirmation that my family had been not only avoiding me but actively minimizing me, I spent a week in a fog. I went through the motions, emails, design reviews, client meetings, but I wasn't really there. I kept thinking back to little moments. Like the time I helped Lauren pay off a credit card debt when she was going through her divorce, $3,000 that I never asked her to repay. Or when I canceled a trip to Paris to stay home with my mother after she had surgery. I slept on her couch for 3 nights, waking up every 3 hours to check her medication. None of it mattered now. Not to them. It hit hardest one rainy Tuesday afternoon, when I opened an old photo album I hadn't touched in years. I don't even know why I did it. Maybe I was looking for proof that it hadn't always been this way, that I had once belonged. Page after page, there I was, at the beach, in birthday hats, holding hands with cousins at Christmas. But as the years went on, the photos thinned. My face disappeared. By the time I reached the last page, it was like I'd been erased in real time, and I cried. Not soft, quiet tears, but the kind that come from deep inside your ribs, the kind you can't breathe through. I cried for every ignored message, every unanswered voicemail, for every time I smiled through their indifference, for every version of myself that begged to be included. That day, I allowed myself to break. I curled up on the couch in my oversized sweater, tea gone cold on the table beside me, and I asked myself the question I'd been avoiding for years. Why didn't they love me enough to stay? And just as quickly, another thought followed. Why did I spend so long trying to earn what should have been freely given? That's when I realized something important. I had confused loyalty with worth. I thought that if I kept showing up, kept giving, kept proving myself, eventually they would see me. Eventually they would come around. But some people don't want to see you. Not when your light makes them feel smaller. Not when your independence reminds them of everything they refuse to become. I wasn't the failure. I was the threat. I was the mirror they didn't want to look into. And that's when the sadness began to shift. Slowly, like a tide going out, it turned into something sharper, more focused. Not revenge, not yet, but resolve. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled me. I started walking again in the mornings, breathing deeper. I cleared my schedule for a week and took a solo trip to Sedona, a place I'd always wanted to visit, but never gave myself permission to. I hiked alone through red rock canyons, let the silence of the desert hold me. And on the last night, under a sky so full of stars it almost felt like a dream, I whispered something out loud for the first time. They lost me. It wasn't me who failed them. It was them who failed to see what they had. And soon, they were going to understand exactly what that loss meant. Not through rage, not through confrontation, but through the most unexpected thing of all, grace. Because sometimes, the most powerful kind of vengeance is living beautifully, loudly, and fully, right in front of the people who tried to bury you. I didn't return from Sedona as the same woman who left. Something in me had settled, like a bruise that stopped aching and started hardening into something stronger. I wasn't interested in revenge for the sake of pettiness. That wasn't who I was. But I was interested in truth, in making them see, and maybe, just maybe, in letting them feel, just for a moment, what it meant to be invisible. I started small. I knew that word of the inheritance would spread eventually. My late uncle had been wealthy, eccentric, and famously private. He had cut ties with most of the family years ago, something they used to mock him for. And yet, I was the one he left everything to. He didn't just leave me money. He left me land, properties, vintage cars, and a private collection of art that included original pieces by names I had only seen in museums. The total value had quietly risen over the years, and after my lawyer completed the transfer, I was in possession of an estate valued at just over $4.2 million. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't post about it, but I also didn't hide it. I hired a PR firm, not flashy, but smart. I began positioning my design consultancy in luxury and high-end markets. My name started appearing in small features, 10 Women to Watch in Creative Real Estate, From Outsider to Insider, Olivia Bennett's Rise. I let the visibility rise, step by elegant step, and then came the moment I had predicted. Lauren called. I stared at her name blinking on my phone like a memory I hadn't summoned. For 10 seconds, I considered letting it ring out. But I answered. Olivia? Oh my God. It's been forever. I was just thinking about you. I said nothing. She rushed to fill the silence. So, funny story. Mom mentioned something about you. Inheriting property? That vineyard upstate, right? I had no idea you were involved in something like that. There it was. Not, how are you? Not, I miss you. Not even, I'm sorry. Just curiosity, coated in sugar. Just enough sweetness to cover the sour aftertaste of guilt. I smiled to myself. Oh yes, I said, voice calm. It's been an interesting few months. She laughed lightly. We should catch up. I was actually going to suggest a girls' weekend. Just us. It's been too long. Too long? A decade wasn't a gap. It was a decision. I didn't say no. I didn't say yes either. I let her sit in the limbo she'd once sentenced me to. And in the background, I kept planning. The truth was, I didn't want a dramatic confrontation. I wanted consistency. I wanted to be so poised, so unbothered, that it drove them mad with questions. I started accepting interviews, subtly name-dropping the estate, letting it slip that I was working on a philanthropic initiative in honor of my uncle, supporting young artists from underprivileged communities. I got an invitation to speak at a design symposium in New York. My name appeared beside people they respected. My mother's book club talked about me without realizing I'd become the Olivia in that article. Suddenly, I was being discussed again, but this time, not as a burden, not as the disappointment, as someone untouchable. What do you think? Should Olivia let her family back in, now that they suddenly remember her? Or should she keep her distance and protect her peace? Let me know in the comments below. But I wasn't done, because there was one thing they hadn't counted on. My uncle had left behind a letter, a handwritten one tucked inside his safe. In it, he explained why he left it all to me, why he saw me, why he trusted me, and at the very end, he wrote one line that I will never forget. Let them come find you now, not because they love you, but because they finally realize they lost you. And that's exactly what was happening. They weren't returning out of love. They were returning out of fear. Fear that I had become something they couldn't control, something they could no longer dismiss. And I was just getting started. They started reaching out more. First it was Lauren, texting me about restaurants she thought I'd like. Then my mother called to say she missed our talks, conveniently forgetting we hadn't had a real conversation in years. Cousins I hadn't seen since my 20s suddenly popped up in my DMs. So proud of all you've done. And, next time you're in town, we should catch up. I responded politely. Warm, even. But distant. The way you'd speak to someone who once borrowed something precious and never gave it back. To them, it must have felt like I was thawing, like their charm was working. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't rejoining them. I was simply observing. I had learned to listen without reacting, to smile without revealing too much. They thought I was softening, but in truth, I was studying the way they moved, the timing of their interest, the layers of convenience beneath their words. I even agreed to attend a family gathering. It was a garden brunch hosted by my sister. Nothing fancy, she'd said. Just the family, catching up. When I arrived, heads turned. I wore a soft white dress and low heels. No jewelry, no dramatic makeup, just elegance, quiet confidence. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. They were warm, almost overly so. Lauren embraced me like we'd never had a cold day between us. My mother's eyes glistened. Real tears, or performative ones, I wasn't sure. My father gave me a stiff hug and said, "You look successful." It wasn't a compliment. It was a confession. Lunch was polite. Questions about my work, my travels, my famous inheritance. Someone joked that I should buy the family a vacation home. Everyone laughed. So did I. But in my mind, I was already 10 steps ahead. They didn't ask about my heartbreaks, or what those 10 years alone had felt like. They didn't apologize, or even acknowledge the gap they had carved around me. They wanted the version of me that fit into their narrative now. I gave it to them, for a little while, because I knew what was coming. You see, Part of inheriting my uncle's estate meant inheriting control over two major trust funds that had been quietly supporting multiple family-owned businesses. What none of them knew was that legally, I now had the right to review how those funds were being used. One of those businesses? My brother-in-law's failing real estate agency. And another? My cousin's struggling event planning company. They had no idea that the invisible one was now their silent lifeline. So while they passed the bread and poured mimosas, I smiled and thought about the next board meeting, where I'd be making some decisions about fund renewals and quarterly grants. Not out of revenge, out of principle, because it was never about the money. It was about respect. And they were going to learn in the most elegant way possible that you cannot erase someone without consequences. That brunch ended with fake hugs and promises to do this more often. I nodded, thanked Lauren, and walked to my car without looking back. I wasn't angry. I was in control. And power, when held quietly, makes people deeply uncomfortable. They didn't know what I was planning. They didn't even know they were part of it yet. But they would. Very soon. I didn't think they could hurt me anymore. Not after everything I had already survived. Not after a decade of silence, dismissal, and the slow, deliberate severing of emotional ties. I thought I had nothing left to lose. But I was wrong. It happened during a routine audit. I had hired a private financial advisor to help me sort through the complexities of the trusts my uncle left behind. We were reviewing records, mostly standard checks and expense reports, when she paused, frowning slightly at her screen. "Olivia," she said carefully, "do you recognize this name?" She turned her laptop toward me. My sister's name, Lauren Bennett Gray. And next to it, an unauthorized wire transfer. $18,500, pulled from one of the smaller legacy funds, dated 6 years ago. My stomach dropped. "Is this personal use?" I asked. She clicked a few more tabs. "Technically, this fund was set aside to support community development projects. This transfer was labeled as a consulting expense, but there's no record of services rendered. And it's not the only one." Over the next 10 minutes, I watched her scroll through a half-dozen transfers, each between $5,000 and $30,000, all under different names. But one pattern repeated, all linked to people in my family, and all during the exact years I had been completely cut off. I sat back in my chair, blood rushing to my ears. They hadn't just ignored me, they'd used me. Or rather, they'd used what they assumed would one day be theirs. Because before my uncle changed his will, those funds were expected to go to my father, who had been grooming the next generation to treat them like family resources. They cut me out because they assumed I didn't matter, that I had no place in the legacy, that I was disposable. But my uncle saw them, all of them, and that's why he changed everything. What crushed me most wasn't the money. It was the clarity. They hadn't just chosen to forget me out of emotional neglect. They had quietly profited from my absence, justified it, benefited from it. Lauren, who once shared my secrets. My father, who taught me to ride a bike. Even my cousin Rachel, who I had taken on a fully paid trip to Napa before she graduated. They had all taken something and said nothing. That night I sat in bed reading through old messages, apologies that never came, invitations that never existed, and I realized that even now, they weren't coming back because they missed me. They were coming back because they sensed the door was closing, and they needed to get in before it locked for good. But they were too late. Because the woman they thought they had discarded, she no longer existed. And the woman I had become, she had receipts. I didn't yell. I didn't storm over to anyone's house or post anything online. I sent a single professional email. Subject line, clarification regarding past fund activity. Body. Dear Lauren, I hope you're well. As we complete our internal audit of the Wellington Trust, I noticed several transfers connected to your name that appeared to fall outside the authorized usage of grant funds. Please provide documentation for these expenses by the end of next week, or the matter will be forwarded to legal counsel for review. Best, Olivia Bennett. No warmth, no anger, just facts. Because that's what they never expected from me. Accountability. The silence that followed was almost satisfying. No calls, no texts, just quiet. like the kind I had lived in for years. Only now, they were the ones frozen on the outside. There is a kind of power that doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't come from screaming or slamming doors. It comes from silence, from holding your head high when others expect you to shrink, from knowing you no longer owe anyone an explanation. That's the kind of power I stepped into. After the audit was complete and the settlement offers were sent, I waited. Not anxiously, just patiently, like someone who already knows the ending to a story others are still trying to rewrite. Each person responded through their lawyer. No apologies. No phone calls. Just payments. Quiet compliance. I didn't ask for direct restitution. I didn't want their money touching my name. Instead, I arranged for each person who had improperly accessed the trust funds to donate double the amount they'd taken to an organization supporting first-generation college students. It was poetic, really. The money they had taken from a legacy they didn't build was now helping others build their own. Some would say that wasn't revenge. I say it was elegance. But I wasn't done yet, because I needed closure. Not for them, for me. So I planned an event. A public celebration honoring my uncle's legacy, held at the vineyard where everything had quietly begun. We invited local artists, nonprofit leaders, partners, clients, people who had shaped my path, people who had earned their seat at my table. And yes, I invited my family. Every one of them. Not because I wanted reconciliation, I didn't, but because I wanted them to see the woman they thought would disappear, see the community I had created. See the legacy they tried to erase. Alive, thriving, unstoppable. They came. Of course they did. Dressed modestly, smiling nervously, watching me from across the courtyard like I was a stranger. And in many ways I was. The woman I used to be. The one who begged for their love, who cried at their silence. She was gone. This version of me? She no longer chased anyone. When it was time to speak, I stepped up to the microphone. I told the story of a man who saw potential not in loud voices, but in quiet resilience, who left his fortune not to the flashiest candidate, but to the one who kept showing up even when no one was watching. I spoke of starting from nothing, of being underestimated, of building something no one else believed in. I didn't mention names. I didn't need to. I was the evidence. As I spoke, I watched their faces. My father, arms folded, pretending not to listen. My sister, eyes wide, hands clenched in her lap. My mother, her expression the hardest to read. There was pain there, maybe even shame, but not once did she meet my gaze. Afterward, people came up to shake my hand, to thank me, to share how the story of the estate and the transformation it funded had inspired them. My family stayed near the back, unsure of what to do. They didn't try to approach me, not that day, and I didn't go to them. I walked outside, past the vineyard rows, down the hill to where an old bench overlooked the valley. My uncle used to sit there for hours. It felt right to end the day there. As the sun dipped low and the breeze picked up, I pulled out my phone. There were unread messages, missed calls. One from Lauren, one from my mother. I opened neither. Instead, I blocked both numbers. Not out of anger, but out of peace. Because healing doesn't always look like reunion. Sometimes, healing is a quiet decision made in the stillness of your own soul. A decision to stop bleeding for people who would never have done the same for you. A decision to protect your joy, your light, your name. I looked out at the land, the vines, the sky painted gold, and for the first time in years, I felt completely whole. They hadn't broken me. They had revealed me. And from now on, I would never again let anyone make me feel small for being everything they were too afraid to be. A few weeks after the vineyard event, I received something I never expected. A letter. An actual handwritten letter. Not an email, not a voicemail, not a text. A letter, in my mother's neat slanted cursive, addressed to me with full formality. Ms. Olivia Bennett. I stared at the envelope for a while before opening it. My hands didn't shake. But my heart did something strange. Not pain exactly, but a kind of weight. Not fear, but a flicker of old hope I hadn't fully killed off. The letter was 3 pages long, measured, polished, emotionally tidy. She began by telling me how proud she was, how amazed she was by what I'd built, She said she had heard about the community initiatives I had started, that she had read my name in an article a friend forwarded her. She wrote, "You've become someone truly remarkable." And then came the part that made my breath catch. "I hope we can find a way back to each other." Back? Back to what? To a decade of silence? To a table where there was never a chair for me? To rooms where I had to prove my worth just to be acknowledged? There was no back for me to return to. She didn't apologize. Not once. She never said, "I was wrong." She never asked, "How did it feel to be shut out?" No. She just wanted to move forward, without touching the damage, without naming it. I folded the letter and set it on the windowsill. I didn't rip it. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. What I felt was clarity. I realized that people will often try to reopen doors they once slammed shut, but only once they realize what's on the other side. And sometimes they want access to you, not because they love you, but because they can't stand that you're fine without them. I didn't write back. Not because I was bitter, because I was healed. It's hard to explain what it feels like to finally outgrow the version of yourself that begged to be loved. To finally bury the child inside you who kept whispering, "If I'm good enough, maybe they'll see me." I walked away from that version of myself like stepping out of an old skin. And for the first time, I didn't feel empty. I felt whole. Because the truth is, grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a quiet understanding that certain people will never be who you hoped they'd be, and no amount of waiting will turn absence into presence. So I stopped waiting. I filled my home with laughter from people who showed up, with art from young women whose dreams reminded me of my own. I planted lavender in my backyard. I started writing again, not for work, but for myself. I even started mentoring a few girls through my foundation. One of them, Lily, asked me one afternoon, "Were you always this confident?" I smiled. "No," I told her, "but I was always this capable. I just needed time to believe it." One evening, I found myself sitting on the same bench at the vineyard, overlooking the valley as the sun dipped behind the hills. The breeze was soft, the silence was kind. I thought about my uncle, about how he saw me when no one else did. And I whispered into the wind, "Thank you. You gave me a legacy. But more than that, you reminded me I was never the problem." And that was it. Not a final confrontation, not a dramatic ending, just truth, just peace. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is quietly reclaim your place in the world, without begging anyone to make room for you. If you've ever been excluded, forgotten, or made to feel like you were too much or not enough, let this be your reminder. You were never invisible. They just refused to look. And your worth? It was never up for a vote. That chapter of my life is closed now. I don't revisit it out of pain. I revisit it to remember how far I've come, to remind myself that being abandoned didn't break me. Being underestimated didn't stop me. Being left out only pushed me further in. I no longer chase apologies. I no longer explain my worth. I no longer shrink to fit places I've outgrown. And if you've ever been through something similar, if your own family or friends or anyone you once trusted made you feel like you were disposable, I want you to hear this clearly. You didn't deserve that. You didn't deserve the silence, the side comments, the feeling of being less than. And no, you don't owe them another chance just because you share a name or a past. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconnection. Sometimes it means finally letting go of the hope that they'll change, and choosing to love yourself enough to walk away with your head high. That's what I did. I didn't slam the door behind me. I left it open, not for them, but for me, so I could walk through it freely, on my own terms, into a future I created for myself. And if I could tell my younger self one thing, it would be this: you were always enough. They just didn't know how to love someone who didn't need their approval. But you will learn to love yourself anyway. Now it's your turn. Have you ever felt left out by your own family? Have you ever had to cut someone off just to protect your peace? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every one of them, and trust me, you're not alone. If this story moved you, give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe. There are so many more stories waiting to be told, and maybe one of them will be yours. Until next time. Stay strong, stay kind, and never apologize for becoming the version of yourself that saved your life.